And a happy Sunday evening to you all, especially my friends in Big 12 country here with me, because on a weekend of chaos in college football, yet another chaotic weekend, the Big 12 avoided it this time. It was not chaos in the Big 12, it was chalk. You hear that? Chalk. Just one big old Big 12 chalkboard to get Arizona State and Iowa State to the Big 12 championship game, as well as Tulane going down, which definitely helps the league. There is a lot to digest from everything that happened. I would even tell you the chaos that we saw was good for the Big 12 from the standpoint of it gives you a little bit more hope and optimism for what could happen in the playoff, whether that's going to be as a 4 seed with a bye if Boise is to lose this weekend in the Mountain West Championship game, or if it's going to be, hey, we'll take our show on the road and go play at the number 5 seed in the college football playoff. Either way, we continue to see results, even if they're not wins for the underdog, perhaps just an 8 overtime game. We continue to see results that reinforce that the gap is not that large between the teams at the top of the sport right now and everybody else, which means that if ever there were a year for the Big 12 to make some noise in the playoff, pick up a win, perhaps 2. I don't know. We'll see. This may be as good a year as any because of how much parity there is in the sport this entire season. We've got the coaching carousel fired up, man. Neal Brown gone. Gus Malzahn, the new offensive coordinator at Florida State. Who saw that coming? Pretty wild. Texas Tech is in the market for a new defensive coordinator. So you've got coaches, athletic departments, administrators in the Big 12 working hard and working fast at making changes and trying to get that show on the road, which is pretty wise, especially from a head coaching standpoint when you already have a job like North Carolina open. Purdue is open as well after just a 2-year stint there with the former Illinois defensive coordinator. That didn't work out very well, and I don't know that that will be crazy competition for the Big 12 in West Virginia. But there is one very, very intriguing name to your boy here that has popped up for that West Virginia job that I really love because, frankly, West Virginia fans, we need to talk. I don't like a lot of these candidates that I hear for the West Virginia job. It is like a recycled coaches convention, these hot boards for the West Virginia job. You can do better. You can do better than trying to pluck the Boston Celtics version of Shaquille O'Neal to be your head coach, because that's what Jimbo Fisher would be. That's what Rich Rodriguez would be. We can do better than that, West Virginia. But we'll talk later on in the show. Might be a bit of a long one tonight because of everything that we have to get to, but I am excited to do it. I'm excited to have you here. Thank you, everybody who is here. All of you, I appreciate you immensely. As you file into the chat, make sure and continue to keep that thing lively, within reason, of course, here tonight. If you are watching on Twitter, you can be a part of the chat if you're on YouTube. You got to head over to YouTube. It's just John Kurtz on YouTube to do that. But if you're going to take it in on Twitter too, I very much appreciate the audience there as well. So come one, come all as far as that is concerned. But if you want to be a part of the show, obviously get in that chat. But if you want to make sure that your chat, your question or comment makes the show, click the $ below the chat box. That is how you will submit a super chat. You submit a donation, turns it into a super chat, and it will guarantee that it gets on the show tonight. 1, as I said, that is the way to make your voice heard for sure. And 2, it's just a great way to support the work that I'm doing here on this channel. So appreciate everybody who helps out in that way. I know not everybody can, but those of you who do, I couldn't do it without you. And I really, truly do appreciate your support. So thank you for everybody who does that. If you are not watching live, you can also still be a part of the show and make sure that your voice is heard by simply going to Venmo. It is John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo. And you can, with a donation there, leave your question or comment, and I will kick off the next show with it. So plenty of ways to get in touch, plenty of ways to support, 2 free ways to support that are very, very easy to do. I would much appreciate if you could just like the video. That would be fantastic. Totally free. Just takes 1 click. Low effort. All right. Doesn't really take much, even if you're just chilling on the couch. Like that video, it would be awesome. And the other is, of course, those of you who are open for business subscribers already know all about this. Now over 3,000. We're getting well over 3,000 subscribers to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter. But if you are somebody out there that wants Big 12 news on a regular basis, you don't want to have to sift through going to ESPN.com and the college football page and then reading everything from a Big 10 and SEC perspective. How's it affecting the Power 2? And that's not what you're getting with Open for Business. You're getting filtered down to what matters to the Big 12. No SEC or Big 10 bias there. And by the way, we will talk about some of that SEC bias later on here. But anyway, ofbnews.com to subscribe to the Open for Business newsletter. Should have thrown that out there earlier. ofbnews.com to subscribe to Open for Business. You can also just click the link in the description of this video. So lots of ways to do that. I just saw, did I just see in the chat somebody said Micah Hudson is transferring? Is that real or is that just in the rumor stage? Someone in the chat needs to clear that up for me. I have not been on Twitter over the last couple of hours as I was prepping for the show. So somebody tell me if the Micah Hudson thing is real that I just saw from a Texas Tech fan there. Okay. I believe that is all the housekeeping that I have to get out. Our web says it's real. Wow. Okay. Man. 5-star plus recruit that Texas Tech had in there apparently transferring. Wow. Michael, let's kick it off with a couple of super chats. Appreciate you guys here. Then we'll get to the zaniness of this weekend and how the Big 12 dodged it. Michael, thank you for your support. He says, I hate K-State. JK, BYU shoulda, woulda, coulda versus Kansas. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one if you're a BYU fan to lament. I mean, Arizona State is a very good team, and you dug a really big hole there, and they're playing like a team completely possessed right now. If they have Jordan Tyson healthy, which I do really worry about for their sake heading into the game this week against Iowa State. But yeah, Michael, I if you listen to my 3 Maw podcast, like I did not predict K-State to win. I had them losing by 6. They lost by 8. I was not very optimistic about that game in that spot against that team. So Iowa State is the better team right now, quite frankly. So sorry about that, Michael. I know there are a lot of folks in Boulder who are frustrated with BYU as well, maybe Houston. But BYU sure for a minute was trying to go full November BYU once again and give that game away. They did not. But congrats, Michael, on a 10-win season, man. That is still a hell of an accomplishment for Kalani Sitake and company this year. Payson Cougar fans, similar sentiments, I'd imagine here, says congrats, Iowa State and Arizona State. Thanks, BYU, for the great year. Big 12 went 1 for 2 in men's and women's cross country national championships. Go Cougars, go Big 12. All right, thank you, Payson Cougar fan. Gracious in not really defeat because BYU won this weekend, but gracious in defeat in terms of getting to the Big 12 championship game. Love to see that and love to see your support, Payson Cougar fan. James in here as well. James, did you have a chat to go with this? Let's see. I'm not seeing anything, James. So let me know, James, if there was something that I'm missing there. But thank you immensely for your support. Really appreciate that. All right. The Big 12 has been the lead chaos agent in college football for most of the year, right? I mean, that's reputation of the conference. That is what everybody says. It's honestly was the lazy take about the Big 12 until it turned into the accurate take. Kansas knocking everybody off. It was always going to be chaos in the Big 12, except for this week. The league took a backseat to all the chaos, and it came at the perfect time. Maybe not perfect. It would have been nice to have come a week or two earlier, but it at least came at a completely necessary time because the Big 12 could have been in real trouble had things not gone the way that they did this weekend, and you didn't have the favorites winning out, and you didn't have Tulane losing. But it could not have gone much better for the league this weekend because here is what went down. All right. As I said, the 4 favorites all won. And if you were taking betting odds on that going into the weekend, like what would the odds have been that all 4 favorites in the Big 12 up at the top, the 2 lost teams, were going to win based on what we had seen with Kansas taking everybody down, seemingly all of those teams poised to stub their toe, just as had been happening throughout the entire year as the league beat itself up over and over again. Instead, not only did all the favorites win, but relatively comfortably. and 2 total blowouts. I mean, Arizona State, boy, did they take Arizona behind the woodshed, man. Completely clocked them. Like, that was 35-0 before you could really even blink. I felt like watching that early. I was like, God, this feels like Camp Scattaboo could wind up with like 350 total yards if he really wanted it to, man. I we'll see what happens at Arizona. I know I continue to see Jason Scheer and others who cover the program insinuating that there's a real shot that Brent Brennan could lose his job. As just an outsider, I have no connection. I'm not paying attention to any of the inside info there, and I trust those guys, obviously, as being connected there. I have a hard time seeing Arizona being a place that is motivated and financially able to make a move like that as quickly as is being insinuated there. But I've seen enough people say it that apparently that is real. And it's because of stuff like that, man. I know Arizona State is playing good football, but geez, you're at home. It's rivalry week. We're watching things like 8 overtimes between Georgia Tech and Georgia. Like, you can't put up any sort of fight, like no fight at all against Arizona State there before you're just completely whitewashed. Anyway, that helps. It helps that Arizona State looked good. Arizona did the conference a favor. Definitely did a solid with that. So can Arizona State perhaps gain a spot or two? Perhaps on Boise because of that performance when Boise looked just okay against Oregon State. I don't know. Maybe. They were both playing similar teams in terms of what they've been this year. Oregon State, I believe, has won 4 games this year. So 2 teams in the same ballpark, and Arizona State just completely demolished them on the road, and Boise at home, kind of struggled to pull away. They wind up winning by a couple of scores, but they did struggle to pull away. Colorado clubbed Oklahoma State. Woodshed. Man, Oklahoma State, dude, I'm left with a lot of questions. One, how bad is Texas Tech's defense? Which the answer is apparently pretty bad because Tim DeRuyter got fired today by Joey McGuire. But I say that because Oklahoma State put up damn near 50 points last week with their freshman quarterback, who was back at it again against Colorado and did nothing, absolutely nothing, except give a nice little nudge toward Travis Hunter's Heisman campaign by throwing an interception there. But, man, 50 burger dropped by the Colorado offense. It was not, I mean, they had that game dead and buried by the end of the first quarter. You knew exactly where that was going. And now Oklahoma State fans are left to wonder, like, what the hell are we doing with Gundy at this point? And like, what? Gundy says he's not going to retire. Old lady won't let him. That's a whole different issue here. But for Colorado, I know they didn't wind up making the Big 12 championship game. It was a long shot. But it was still nice for the league's sake to see favorites in general dominate. And the biggest thing that happened for the league out of that is just that I mentioned Travis Hunter's Heisman campaign. That gets a little extra boost, right? Wild touchdown catch, continues to fill up the highlight reel, got another pick. If you're going by the betting odds, it sure seems like Travis Hunter has that thing wrapped up now. Iowa State handled K-State. Nothing crazy special about it. Rocco Becht completed almost like 33% of his passes. It was not his best day, and he did try to hand K-State 3 or 4 interceptions that they were not willing to take. But really, Iowa State was just the more well-coached and tougher team, and I think that played out over the course of the games. K-State kind of bumbled around like they have for a lot of this year. And Iowa State, as such, is rewarded with the first 10-win season in school history. They'll go to the Big 12 championship game. Guess it depends on where you look as to whether or not they're a favorite. I saw one early line that had them as a 1-point favorite. And Iowa State, I can remember halfway through the year saying, hey, both they and BYU are unbeaten. I feel like Iowa State has the higher ceiling because they have a more explosive offense. It feels like they can beat you in more different ways, like a wider variety of ways. And I still feel like they are a team that has the ability to do that. More so than Arizona State at this time? I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I might go slightly in Arizona State if they have Jordan Tyson healthy. But I think Iowa State is a worthy adversary there. And if you weren't going to get Colorado in the Big 12 championship game, I do think Iowa State is a better bet for the league to actually make noise in the college football playoff if they get there than BYU would be, which, hey, BYU started to go into November BYU mode, but they pulled it out in time to win. And while all of that is going on in the Big 12, you get a great, great favor from Memphis. Shout out to Memphis. Never quite good enough for the Big 12, but damn it, did they help out the league this weekend. Took away that threat of the nightmare scenario, which would have been both Tulane and Boise ahead of you in the college football playoff rankings, which would mean you get left out entirely. And Tulane really just laid an egg. They didn't look very good at all. Not a particularly close game against Memphis. They were very turnover prone. So that helps. That helps. We also saw some major upsets that, to me, this is obviously the bigger picture of the college football weekend, that we had Ohio State somehow losing to Michigan, that we had Miami blowing a 21-point lead, 21-0 lead, in fact, on the road at Syracuse to lose, potentially ending their college football playoff hopes. We shall see. They are going to have to put 12 teams in somehow, and they are not going to want to put a Big 12 team in there. So, I don't know. Miami's totally dead, but close. And then you have Georgia and Georgia Tech going to 8 overtimes. That's the 5th best team in the ACC on the road at the presumed SEC champion, the Georgia Bulldogs. All of that stuff, man, it gives me more hope that the Big 12 can win a game, whether or not it's going to be a 4-5 game on a neutral site or it's going to be a 5-12 road game. Now you're starting to see projections that are a little bit different than going to Columbus, Ohio, which have me a bit more optimistic. More on that in just a moment. But this broader picture here is that all the discourse throughout a lot of the weekend, it's centered around the SEC, but a lot of it was basically just like everybody being like, hey, SEC fans, SEC homers, SEC sycophants, this is not 2019 SEC. Things have changed for a variety of reasons, but we have way more parity this year. It's not a league that deserves crazy special treatment, and there are a lot of teams that could beat teams in your league. That is a harsh reality for you to accept this year, but it is the reality, and that is a good thing for the Big 12, having a chance to go do something, get a TCU over Michigan type of win in the college football playoff this year, which would be fantastic for the league. Only other thing you could have really asked for would have been Boise losing to Oregon State. As I said, I was watching a good chunk of that game. Ashton Genty's good, but they definitely let Oregon State hang around. I don't know. Maybe the only other thing you could say is if the Big 12 wanted to get the biggest TV number possible for next week in the Big 12 championship game, getting Colorado into the title game would have been very nice. So had Houston been able to pull it off and you had Arizona State, Colorado, that number would have been crazy. You could probably tack on an extra couple million onto whatever the number is going to be for everybody watching on Saturday, because everybody would have loved to see the Buffs there. I'm going to have more on the playoff scenarios in just a moment. Let me hop into some of your super chats here real quick before I do that. Appreciate all of you guys. Avery Cope. What's up, Avery Cope? Adding one more weekend to the playoff and keeping the 4 first-round buys creates a 28-team playoff. Okay, hang on. So you're adding one more weekend. 10 auto bids and 18 at-large spots. Could you see demand for something like this? Would be nice. I mean, I could see eventually going down that road because they're always going to want to milk more money out of everything, and it's why we see the NCAA tournament continue to expand. I got to be honest, I'm just not – that feels like too much for me. Like if we're talking about the regular season, we already have a debate about devaluing the regular season too much with the playoff. If you've got that many teams, I'm not a huge fan of it. That is more similar to what are the FCS playoffs? How many teams are in the FCS playoffs? Would they be 32? 24. All right, 24 in the FCS playoffs. So it would be very similar to that. I would not feel like that's particularly necessary. At that point, you're going to get, if you've got team 28 playing team 5 in that first round, you're talking about like Ohio State. Who would be 28 that was just outside of the top 25? Yeah, no, I guess it could be like Ohio State, K-State or something. I don't know. I certainly would not want to watch that right now. it would get more Big 12 teams in, which I would imagine is what you're saying there, like why it might be nice. And from a standpoint of, hey, that could just give you more opportunities with things on the line to play teams that are from the SEC. It might not be the big boys. You might still struggle to beat them, but if you have more opportunities, could that be a good thing? Maybe. I don't know that in the anywhere near future you're going to see the appetite for that out there from many people, but just my take on it. Appreciate your thoughts there, Avery. Earl, what's up, Earl? Earl Carr says, I don't care whatever bowl game BYU goes to. I am focused on the 2025 football season. Well, as a K-State guy myself, I can echo your sentiments there. I do not care about this bowl game. That's the world we live in 2024. As a college football fan, it's hard to get very fired up about these bowl games, especially when you are a team that had aspirations on something bigger. And that's definitely what happened to BYU throughout the year with the way that they were playing. So believe me, I get it. I would not fault you for that for a single second. And the only way, I love someone throughout the idea the other day that, like, to make bowls better, just put all the teams into one big draft and let the Bulls draft teams, get rid of the conference tie-ins, and you could create more intriguing matchups. That would at least help some. But until we get that, I think I'm with you, Earl. Nate, what's up, Nate? Nate asks, who is on your short list for the West Virginia job? Hopefully not Matt Campbell or Anthony Becht. Good luck to K-State in your bowl game. Thank you. Yeah, I've seen the Iowa State reaction with Anthony Becht there, which I get. Obviously, Rocco Becht being the quarterback of the Iowa State Cyclones. I'll tell you the one name. I'm going to talk much more about this later, but the one name that intrigues me the most for West Virginia that I've seen so far is Andy Kotelnicki, who is the offensive coordinator at Penn State and was the offensive coordinator at Kansas with Lance Leipold. Now, Jeff Grimes, if you do look, my buddy Cole Manbeck pointed this out to me yesterday. If you look at the end of the year numbers for Jeff Grimes as Kansas's offensive coordinator, they are in a lot of ways not that far off of Andy Kotelnicki, but man, it felt like they were a lot more effective, certainly more consistent with him at OC. And I think he is a star. I have no idea if that makes him head coaching material, but I think he's a star as a play caller, and that makes it a really, really intriguing one for me. So that's what I'm interested in. I'm sure that's not what most West Virginia fans are most intrigued by. So anyway, Nate, I appreciate you, man. Al, what's up, Al? Al says, John, love the show. Glad I got to meet you at Big 12 basketball media days. Oh, hey. Al, great dude, man. I remember meeting you. Keep up the good work. I think the football playoff will go to 16. It's going to expand again for sure. And, you know, a lot of the talk has been about 14, whether it's going to be 14 or 16. It will expand again. So I guess to the point that Avery was making there, it's going to expand again. 28, though, feels too far for now, that we're not going to have that much of an appetite. But I guess the other thing, Avery, I would say, and to Al as well, is we got to see how it goes. You know, we got to see how people feel about it. If there are going to be a ton of blowouts early on and it's kind of boring, maybe there's not as much appetite for that. But if it is a much more parity-filled sort of field, then maybe that does increase the appetite and demand for something like that. But Al, I appreciate the contribution, my friend, and I appreciate you being here and just supporting the channel. Great to meet you, and hope to see you again on down the road. All right. So as far as the playoff goes, is there a world in which the Big 12 can be competitive in a college football playoff game? Now, I'm talking about in this new era, the new Big 12, the new 12-team playoff, not the 4-team playoff, which I know a lot of people would say, well, no, they can't. But yes, au contraire, we always hear about the TCU national championship game and everybody forgetting that they beat Michigan and they were the only team to beat Michigan for over a year until the Wolverines were reigning national champions. But Ohio State is helping. Ohio State is definitely helping the Big 12's odds to be legitimately competitive in a college football playoff game. And I think this is a year, based on what we have seen broadly across the landscape, that the Big 12 can be actually competitive here. So here are your scenarios. First of all, like, where is the Big 12 at in all of this right now? What you will need to watch is Friday night, you need to watch the Mountain West Championship game, which is going to be Boise State and UNLV. It is a rematch. Boise State won a tight one against UNLV earlier this year. If Boise beats UNLV, they're going to get the bye in the 4 seed. I don't think, unless on Tuesday we find out that the committee loved Arizona State's knockout blow that they delivered to Arizona so much that they made them, they shoot them up they gain a couple of spots on Boise, probably more like 3-4 spots. Then I don't think there's any way that Arizona State is passing them for just beating Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game. So if Boise beats UNLV, they're going to get that bye and the 4 seed, which would send your Arizona State, Iowa State winner in all likelihood to the 5-12 game in the first round, maybe 6-11. I have seen a prediction or two that have the Big 12 champion. And in this case, I was seeing Arizona State as the 11 going on the road to a 6. Most likely it would be 12-5. If Boise loses to UNLV, which is definitely possible, as I mentioned, they played a really close game earlier this year, and UNLV has been on a heater. That's a pretty good team at this point. The Big 12 title winner should then get the 4 seed and a bye, which obviously makes a massive, massive difference. Being able to essentially, you're talking about the difference between your first game being, first of all, in the first round with no bye week and having to go on the road to the 5 seed versus playing the 5 seed in a neutral environment coming off of a bye where you have a rest advantage. So it's massive. It really is. It's hard to understate, to be honest. And for a while, I was seeing Ohio State as the opponent there. Like Arizona State, Iowa State would be shipped to the Ohio State, Oregon loser in the Big Ten championship game. Everybody assumed hey, Oregon's the higher ranked team, so everybody just projects Ohio State to be that team there. But now you're starting to see a lot of Notre Dame. If you go look at the latest round of projections from everybody on 3 ESPN, lots of people have Notre Dame slotted in as the number 5 right now. They can't go any higher because they're not in a conference. Stubborn MFs. They won't get in a conference. So the highest they can go is number 5, but they obviously have played really good football since losing to Northern Illinois. And so that's what you're starting to see. In the one instance where I saw the Big 12 champ mocked as the 11 seed, they were going on the road to number 6 Texas, which I would also say is a matchup that I would prefer to having to go play at Ohio State. And I know that everybody is going to say, what? Is there really that much of a difference? We just saw Ohio State play at home and Michigan beat them. That was a 6-5 team. Yeah, I know that was a 6-5 team, but that is a 6-5 team that has Ryan Day in a chokehold. They have got him so vexed and just out of his mind. Ryan Day does not lose to bad teams at all. He hardly loses to anybody not named Michigan, but he does not lose to bad teams. They're either losing in the playoff, losing on the road at Oregon, or losing to Michigan. There's no in between. They take care of business all the time, which tells me it is very much just a Michigan thing. The guy feels the pressure of it. It makes him do weird things like try and jam the ball down Michigan's throat, playing right into their hands for an entire game like he did on Saturday. There's something there. Outside of that, Ohio State takes care of business, and I would not want any part of having to go play that game. But if it opens up and it's somebody else. Now, this is assuming, too, that Oregon does beat Penn State in the Big Ten championship game, because if not, Oregon likely becomes your 5 seed, and then going to Oregon, going to Autzen to play that game also sounds like a nightmare, something that I would not want. If you really wanted to get in the nitty-gritty, you could say, well, Oregon played close games with Idaho and Boise earlier this year, so it's not completely out of the question, but that was a long time ago and a different Oregon team than I think what you're seeing right now. But if it's Penn State or Notre Dame, I feel significantly better about the Big 12's chances to be competitive in that scenario. I truly do. Penn State this year, their best win is Minnesota, Illinois. I would probably say the more impressive of the two was going on the road to beat Minnesota, the way that the Golden Gophers were playing toward the end of the year. which, like, that's a good win. And I'm not saying that Penn State is a bad team. I have been very hard on Penn State in the past. I do think that they are a step above what has been typical, even though their resume generally reflects what frustrates and annoys me about Penn State most of the time, which is just lose to Ohio State, beat up on a bunch of bad Big Ten teams, mediocre to bad Big Ten teams, and then slap a 9 or 10 win season together, go to a New Year's Six Bowl, call it good. Only this time it would be heading into the college football playoff. But watching them, I do think that they are better. I think that they are better. Big part of that, Andy Kotelnicki, who's now running the offense. But that is not as daunting a task as Ohio State. Very tough environment, still a good team, not Ohio State at the Horseshoe. Notre Dame, I realize that they are playing a lot better, and it is not the team that lost to Northern Illinois, but they have proven capable of that. They have proven capable of that this year, and I still feel like Riley Leonard, because of his passing limitations, not as high upside of an offense as you otherwise might see in that spot. I would feel much better about Arizona State going to Notre Dame than going to Ohio State. I will put it that way. So I don't think it's totally out of the question for a Big 12 team to win one of those games. Now, what would the line on that be? Arizona State or Iowa State going to South Bend, going to Happy Valley? I mean, it's probably going to be, you're probably like a 17-point underdog, I would think. But just look at what happened this weekend, man. I already mentioned Ohio State, Michigan. How about 8 overtimes for Georgia Tech and Georgia? Like, Georgia Tech is the 5th best team in the ACC. I mean, they're solid. They beat Miami this year, but they're the 5th best team in the ACC. They had Georgia beat, if not for, I'll get on my high horse a little bit here, if not for a missed targeting call, a missed holding call that was pretty blatant there that everybody obviously was able to see. There were some things that really helped Georgia out in getting over the hump in that game. Georgia Tech could have very easily won that. Okay? Similar situation there in terms of the level of underdog that they were in that type of game. Miami lost at Syracuse. We already saw them lose to Georgia Tech earlier this year. Like, there just aren't dominant teams out there. Maybe Oregon. Maybe the way Oregon is playing currently. Maybe. But that you're going to see in the first round game in that 5 spot, if you're the 12 seed going on the road, I just don't feel like there is this daunting road that the Big 12 can't, like a hill that you can't climb there. It's not going to be likely. It's not going to be something that anybody would totally predict, but I do think it is much more possible because of everything we've seen throughout the sport this year. I mean, you look at these teams in the SEC that we're all talking about here. Texas made it all the way to the final week of the regular season without beating a ranked team. They finally do get Texas A&M. Georgia has certainly proved vulnerable and flawed this year. Outside of their 2 losses, I mean, they were Mark Stoops not being a complete coward away from losing to a 4-win Kentucky team. There's just a lot more parity these days, guys. The gap has closed between the haves and the have-nots simply because they can't hoard talent as much with the portal and NIL. Other teams can bridge that talent gap a bit with the rosters. So I think the league does stand a chance, contrary to what you might hear from some folks. Am I talking to JD Pickell on that? Maybe. All right. I'll talk more about that later on in the show as well. Now, if you can find a way to get Boise to lose, if they lose to UNLV, and then all of a sudden you're in that second round game, well, that's great. And as I mentioned, you get a bye, you get a neutral field. But also, if you do find a way to spring one of these upsets, it could almost be a twofer because now you're going on the road to Boise. And now you're talking about a game where the Big 12 team may well be favored. So there is a lot of upside there if you can find a way to pull one of these upsets. I'm not here to predict it. I know people will call me a Big 12 homer for this. That is fine. I just think if you have your eyes open to what's happening in the sport and what this season has told us about everybody out there, you would be unwise to completely discount the possibility of the Big 12 actually springing an upset in one of these. All right. Couple more super chats here. I see everybody flowing in here. Appreciate that. Let me we make this announcement because we now have a bunch more people here. We've got over 1,000 people watching on Twitter right now, which I appreciate all of you guys there. If you have not subscribed to my Big 12 newsletter, Open for Business, you can do so at ofbnews.com. Great way to get your Big 12 news without having to wade through Big 10 and SEC stuff instead of going to ESPN.com and reading their college football news there, which is always going to give you the power to perspective. I'm letting you know what it means for the Big 12. And you're going to get all Big 12-centric news straight to your inbox 3 times a week, totally for free. 3,000 plus subscribers already. Join them at ofbnews.com, or you can click the link in the description of this video. Would also love it if everybody on YouTube, almost 400 of you, could just like the video. That is totally free as well. Really helps me out. That would be awesome. Thank you to those who do that. And let me see here. John Kurtz-4 on Venmo as well, if you want to leave a question or comment there and you are not watching live. Let's talk to Zachary. What's up, Zachary? Zachary says, seeing how this season turned out, if it comes up again during the offseason with the playoff going to 14 teams, should the Big 12 consider taking 2 automatic bids and giving the Big 10 and SEC 4 each? I don't know that the Big 12 will really have a say in that ultimately. Brett Yormark will certainly do everything he can. Like, I have full faith that he will get the best possible scenario for the Big 12 out of that he can, and that there's nobody really that would be able to do a better job than him. I just have my doubts that it would really make much of a difference. So I think you're just going to basically take what the Big 10 or SEC gives you. Now, if your question is, if that's the scenario laid out in front of you and you do have a choice, would you rather just, let it play out the way it's going to play out or take a guaranteed 2 spots? I think we're seeing this year that the better move would be to just take the 2 spots, because the SEC is probably going to wind up with 4 anyway this year. Same with the Big 10. I know we're talking about adding an extra team there, and they could still get at-large bids and all of that. But I would just say, is that ever going to be a year where it costs you, hey, man, the SEC really only had 3 deserving teams this year? Probably not. Probably not. They're probably always going to have 4 very worthy teams there of picking up those buys. And if you can get 2 teams and ensure that you get 2 teams in, because right now, if this year were a 14-team playoff, would BYU or the Iowa State, Arizona State loser be getting into that game? Probably not. Probably not. So I think if you're using this as a guide, that could be a little foolish, but if you're using this as a guide, I think the answer would be yes, that it probably would be the more wise move to take that. The problem here really is just, the idea of the Big 10 and the SEC getting bids that they just getting an advantage that they otherwise don't deserve. They're not so head and shoulders above everybody else as we're seeing this year that they really deserve that sort of special treatment. So you are giving in a bit there, but for your own sake, I think it probably would be worth it. Starter 179. I like Joey McGuire and Chris Kleiman's comments. Do you think the Big 12 should drop to 8 conference games or do no G5 out of conference? It's clear the committee will only give us an at-large if we are undefeated. It's a real conundrum, Starter 179, and I appreciate your support and that question. It's a real conundrum because this is about TV as well, and you need to provide as much TV inventory as possible to be able to make as much money as possible. And we are about to get into a revenue sharing era where every last little dime and penny counts, and you've got schools that are trying to find everything that they possibly can financially to make it work, a la hey, look at what Brett Yormark is doing for the Big 12. He is going out and trying to perhaps name it the All-State 12, working on a naming rights deal. He's talking about negotiating with private equity behind the scenes as well. They're looking for every way to pinch pennies and get money. And you would devalue the TV deal with that. If you're throwing in an extra game against an FCS team instead of a conference game, that's less valuable TV inventory. That's going to eventually hurt you as far as the money you can make there. But if it is going to be hey, you're going to get left out of the playoff or just absolutely never have any shot at another team, you'd have to do a cost benefit analysis of sorts, I suppose, with that to see what's the value of upping our reputation with getting more teams in, having more of a chance there versus what we lose in the short-term money. But it feels like everybody now, I mean, the way the sport's going, it's all short-term cash grabs and not really thinking long-term about the future. So I would have my doubts that that's the way it would actually go. So I think it's complicated, but that's where I would stand on that. Starter 179. Appreciate you. Antoine Codes. Antoine says, I'd rather play Ryan Day over Sark as an Arizona State fan. Yeah, I guess I was really, but would you rather play Ryan Day or James Franklin? Would you rather play Ryan Day or Marcus Freeman? Because I think I'd lean to the other two there. I think I would lean to the other two there as opposed to Ryan Day. Ryan Day, man, Antoine, I get it. Ryan Day's like a punchline right now, but he has been dominant against anybody not named Michigan or like Georgia in the playoff. Anybody else, the guy wins. It's Michigan's got him by the throat. And if it's not him, I actually think Ryan Day is a pretty formidable foe there. Okay, we've got a couple others here. I'm trying to run through these fast, make sure I get to everything. Going to be a long show tonight. Michael says, Big 12 had 3 10-win teams. Amazing. I want a 20-team playoff. All right, well, we've had someone advocate for 28, and now Michael says 20. Top 3 from every Power 4. The championship game +1. 2G, 5 conference champs, 6 at large. 5 by strength of schedule, 1 by fan vote. Oh, I love the idea of a fan vote. That would just be fun because think about everything that could happen there. I mean, college football has a history of cheating, right? It's kind of the deal, whether it was paying players back in the day, SMU, getting the death penalty, all of that. There's always, Connor Stallions. There's always some sort of cheating scandal going on. So somebody would figure out how to rig the system, cheat that, VPNs. I don't know. Someone would figure it out. Hell, it would probably be Connor Stallions. Michigan would get in every year with the fan vote. There would be some way to do that. And that just sounds like total chaos that I love. This all sounds very reasonable. Like, hey, top 3 from every Power 4 conference. Then you pick your 5 at-larges by strength of schedule. All very reasonable, and that's the reason that it would just never happen because the SEC and the Big Ten have too much power, and they wouldn't relinquish it. But I get what you're saying. That's just a wish list. That's what you want, and I like it. I like the proposed theory there, Michael. I do. Thank you for putting that out there. Steve, what's up, Steve? Thank you, Steve, for being here. Steve says the committee putting all the 9-3 SEC teams ahead of the 10-2 Big 12 teams instead of having them intermingled depending on strength of schedule and game results shows how lazy and incompetent they are. It's definitely a frustration of mine, and I think most, at least that are Big 12 fans, about the committee seemingly not being really that interested in strength of schedule. They really don't seem to be that interested in using that as a metric. It's why you're seeing Brett Yormark pushing it as hard as he is. I am with you on that. I mean, like Bama, for instance, this year, I'm sorry, dude. I've seen enough Bama this year to know that ain't Nick Saban Bama. Like that's 2019 Bama is not what you have this year. All right. Jalen Hurts is not walking through that door. Trent Richardson is not walking through that door. Derrick Henry not walking through that door. It is not that version of an Alabama team at all. And yes, it is very, very frustrating. I think Big 12 teams could absolutely hang with Alabama. Oklahoma spanked Alabama, and Oklahoma's 6-6 and struggled their last couple of years in the Big 12. Of course, a Big 12 team could beat Bama. So I'm with you, Steve. I'm with you. Travis, what's up, Travis? Travis says strength of schedule is worthless. I'm assuming you're saying, Travis, strong schedules are worthless. Better to play YMCA 12 times than Alabama once. Add a great PR TV machine to pump you up and you get into the playoff now. Well, the SEC is also coasting on a lot of residual value from what the media machine and just general groupthink in college football has produced over the last decade and a half. We'll see what happens now that we're in this NIL portal era where they don't have a second string that could win the Big 12 or like things that you would hear a lot about back in the day. That's not really the case anymore. So Yes. But yeah, I think you're expressing a lot of the same sentiment there that Steve is, which is why I'm gonna pop this in here. Our web saying, John, what about Kleiman's Big 12 should go to 8 games? I know I just addressed this a second ago, but yeah, I mean, everybody's kind of along the same wavelength here, like frustrated with where the league is at, and should you just ditch one of your tougher non-conference games to make sure that it's, or one of your conference games to bring in another FCS team, basically somebody that you feel like you would beat? Maybe do what the SEC does with that, having that game be in like week 11, week 12, something like that. I definitely understand. Again, I think the issue will be, and I saw Brett Yormark comment a bit on this when he was on the Iowa State K-State broadcast, that it's a convoluted issue, and I imagine a lot of that is just because of TV. Cat fan in Huskerland, a.k.a. Daniel Osborne. What's up, Daniel? Congrats to Arizona State and Iowa State for making it to the Big 12 title game. What took the Cyclones so long to get that 10-win season? But congrats on the achievement. Look at that. Look at that. Breaking bread. K-State and Iowa State congratulating the Cyclones on a 10-win season. Look, what can you say, man? It's the best season in Iowa State history, for sure, easily. And for Matt Campbell to bring the program up from where it was a couple of years ago, the gambling scandal, all of that, incredible job. And the 10 wins is a higher ceiling than I thought that he had. We'll see if he can win a Big 12 championship. Got close to it in the COVID year. This is in no way COVID influenced. So he's done a tremendous job. Iowa State just got it rolling all across the board right now, man. Obviously, men's basketball going well too. So appreciate you, Daniel. Thank you for your support. Thank you for being here. All right, let me give you a couple of quick thoughts on the Big 12 title game, and then I want to dive into coaching carousel as well, because that's already heated up out here in the Big 12. But Big 12 title game, I do think having Colorado in there, as I mentioned earlier, would have been a nice thing for the league, just to see a monster TV number. Like, you would have seen a massive, massive TV number, certainly the best since this Big 12 championship game has become a thing again. But outside of that, I think best outcome for the league in terms of getting the two teams out of the other three that have the best chance getting to the playoff and winning a game. I just, BYU, I mean, love what they were able to accomplish. They squeezed so much juice out of that orange this year, man. And but they were just losing steam by the end of the year. And even the Houston game, you could see it. You know, I mean, it had no business being that close at the end of the game. It felt like another instance of BYU in some ways playing with fire. It just would have had me nervous about what they would do in that spot. If they're going on the road to Notre Dame, which, talk about like an awesome matchup in terms of just two national fan bases there, like that could be really cool. A lot of storylines. Just don't have a lot of faith that BYU would have been able to get that done. I like the upside of Iowa State and Arizona State more in that scenario. I really will be watching very closely what's going to be the status of Jordan Tyson here, who I know left with his arm in a sling, was like in tears at one point. I mean, that guy has been balling out and gives Arizona State a real stud to complement Cam Scadaboo. Scadaboo can't do it all. And when you have Jordan Tyson playing the way that he is, they've got a two-headed monster that's really hard to stop. I guess three if you want to throw in Sam Levitt with that. So also, quick thought, Iowa State should have a fan advantage, right? Because of proximity and how rabid that fan base is. We'll see. Maybe Arizona State will respond and surprise me with that, but I'd imagine Iowa State fans are going to go bonkers buying up those tickets. So maybe more of an Iowa State home game. We shall see. But I'm excited for it. I think it'll be a really good game. I think it'll be a really, really good game. Coaching carousel, man. The Big 12 wasted no time in getting this coaching carousel going. There were questions about a couple of these coaches throughout much of the year, and the schools wasted little time. And really, in one case, the coach wasted very little time. The Big 12 actually lost a coach to the ACC, right? And it was in a Chip Kelly sort of scenario, but actually it's not bad for the Big 12 at all, like you might think on the surface. I want to get into Neal Brown first. So Neal Brown is fired at West Virginia after 6 seasons. He was hired in the same class in 2019 with Les Miles. That was in that class, right? It was Chris Kleiman, Les Miles, Neal Brown. in the Big 12 that year, and Neal Brown is now out. I just think you had to do it if you're West Virginia. Neal Brown seems like a good guy. I feel for him, but man, it was just so mediocre and blah his entire time there. They lost 10 straight games to ranked teams. That was really like the story of this year. Anytime it was a team where, hey, this would be an impressive win where you could jump up and do something, it did not go well. He took care of business against teams that were a little lower on the totem pole, but nothing sexy, nothing exciting. Only one of the 6 seasons that he had at West Virginia produced more than 6 wins. West Virginia is one of only 3 Power 4 programs who have not been ranked since 2019. Like, these are all things, West Virginia fans know this very well. All things that should not be happening there. That's a better program than that. More resources, more history than that. They can win more than that. I'm not saying West Virginia is an easy job. I'm not saying that it is a, better job than most of the conference or anything like that, but it's a job where you should be doing more than that for sure. So I don't know that, is there any pushback to it? West Virginia fans, that what I seemingly have been able to pick up just from Twitter, the internet, everything, West Virginia fans seem pretty excited about this. They're obviously going to have to pay a buyout there that I believe is like $9 or $10 million, but it's not West Virginia fans' money. So I think that they're going to be pretty happy here. And you had to move fast. Like, that's the best way to do it. I applaud West Virginia for that. Ren Baker and company. Just get it done, get it out of the way, and move on, because you need to. North Carolina's already open. I think this is a stretch and unrealistic, but I have seen like John Summerall thrown out there for both jobs. I don't think he's going to either. I think he will be SEC bound eventually, but that's the point. You might be competing with a school like North Carolina for head coaching candidates if you don't just get out in front of it and do it now. Now, I see all the names. West Virginia fans, I see all the names. I see Jimbo. I see Rich Rod. I have seen Barry Odom. I don't like any one of those 3. I just don't. And that probably will not make me real popular with West Virginia fans, but those 3 are all retreads. They're retread coaches. They have been out there. They've been there, done that at the Power 5 level. Like, we've seen it. Just, I used the analogy earlier of like, do you really want to do you want to be like the Celtics bringing in Shaq? You want this to be Celtics Shaq? That's not what you want. Jimbo Fisher in his prime, that's obviously the comp to Shaq. He won a national championship. That was a decade ago, over a decade ago. That was 2013, right? It was over a decade ago, man. The game has changed. Since then, Jimbo has been utterly disappointing, overpaid and utterly disappointing. Texas A&M already made that mistake, guys. Texas A&M already made that mistake and thought that Jimbo was still that dude, and they paid him an obscene amount of money. And they wound up paying him like $70 million just to go away. That's how much they didn't like the guy, just so they could bring somebody in to go 8-4 this year. Look, I do think Elko is good, but that's not what you want. You don't want Jimbo. This is not natty Jimbo. By the way, the game has changed even more, really. Like, he was winning in an era that was not the era of NIL and the transfer portal. I just would not plunk down a bunch of money and a bunch of faith in Jimbo Fisher. Rich Rod, it's kind of the same. Like, I know he's had a couple of nice seasons at Jacksonville State, but I don't trust that. It's been a long time. Okay, Rich Rod's been gone for a while. Thing that resonates with me on that one is, K-State had Frank Martin as a head coach who did some very good things for the basketball program. He's now at UMass. He had a good first year at UMass. I'm not sitting here like, man, they should go hire Frank Martin back. Like, it's not going to just flash back to 2010 if that happens. The game's different. Like, he's different. These guys are just not in the same stage of their careers to be producing at that level. So I don't mean to like crush West Virginia fanfic hopes and dreams, but I would not go down the Jimbo or Rich Rod road. Barry Odom, I'm a little more open to because of the success that he's had at UNLV. But that still is a guy who, was at Missouri and wasn't it at the high power forward level in college football. So I'd be very leery of that. I'm more in on, for sure, Andy Kotelnicki. I already told you guys, I think he is a star play caller. Whether or not that means he will be a great head coach, I don't know. But I would always go in this day and age with somebody who's more offensive minded. I've seen some West Virginia fan sentiment, hey, we want a defensive guy. And I know the pendulum usually swings back and forth one way to the other. But in the modern game, most of the time, I think I would take my chances on a guy who knows the offense, get the offense figured out, just make a great defensive coordinator hire, and it should take care of itself there. If you want to go like Shannon Dawson was on the On3 list, the offensive coordinator at Miami, Mike Denbrock, the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame, he was on that list as well. Yeah, I think those are really intriguing. I don't know as much about them, obviously, as I do Andy Kotelnicki, but those are intriguing. So just some thoughts, West Virginia, just some thoughts. I definitely interview Andy Kotelnicki, who did Mike Asti, is it Asti of West Virginia Sports Now reported that Andy Kotelnicki expects to get an interview. So that's already been out there, which is why I bring him up. Penn State offensive coordinator, former Kansas offensive coordinator. I know a lot of people are like, and I would kind of be like, oh boy, can we just keep him the hell out of this conference? But I'd love to see it, man. I think that would just be so intriguing for me personally as a guy who watched him do what he did at Kansas. I mean, the other thing, I had a video about this already, but obviously you've got Gus Malzahn going to Florida State to be their offensive coordinator. What a win for UCF. What a win. You're worried about, man, do we have $12 million right before revenue sharing to dish out for a buyout? Do we have $12 million that we can give Gus to get out of here after a 4-win season and 10 wins through 2 years in the Big 12? The answer is you don't have to worry about it because he's going to be the offensive coordinator at Florida State. Still surprising to me that Mike Norvell wants that. But I am also like feeling a little bit burned because I was higher on UCF than most this year. And obviously this season was just kind of a disaster. So I am a bit jaded by that and perhaps unable to see the forest through the trees there that the guy throughout his career has been a pretty elite play caller. But you can also sense a theme here. It's kind of my same thoughts on like the Jimbo Richrod thing. Like, I don't know, man. It's different being an offensive coordinator, much different than it is being a head coach. So we'll see. But congrats to UCF for saving the buyout money there, man. That is huge. That is huge. And Texas Tech fired Tim DeRuyter, their defensive coordinator, also got rid of the secondary coach, Marcel Yates. It was interesting to see Tech fans' reaction to that. There's so much criticism for Zach Kittley all the time, and I know Tech fans feel like, well, some Tech fans, like, hey, our offense has so much talent. Expectations should be higher for that. It's ingrained in Tech to have this great offense. The defense typically not that good, but man, the defense gave up 40-plus points 5 times this year. If you're thinking, hey, we needed to pull one more of those games out, how about the defense just give up 30 instead of 45 or 50 and see what happens and take your chances there. Only one FBS team gave up more passing yards this year than Texas Tech, and that was Tulsa, who once made Alan Bowman look like a total freaking superstar at the beginning of the year. So I don't know. I think the move's fine. I like Joey's aggressiveness. That's a guy who's not afraid to get out and do what he thinks needs to be done to make the team what it should be and make the program what it should be. So I appreciate that about Joey. I would hope and imagine that the Tech fans do as well. All right, let me get back to it here. Harrison, thank you for your support, Harrison. Much appreciate that, my friend. Robert, thank you, Robert. Robert says, hi, John. Been a long minute catching this live. Well, glad to have you back. Robert says, just wanted to donate a couple of bucks. Keep up the good work. Wreck 'em. All right, hey, here we go. Thanks, Robert. Congratulations on finishing with an 8-win season. Most wins in a regular season for Texas Tech since 2009 when Mike Leach was around. Gentle Brutality, one of the best names out there in the game. Gentle Brutality. Texas Tech beat both Iowa State and Arizona State, but is a non-factor. Why are they always mediocre? Never a doormat, but never a champion. Well, I understand where you're coming from on that. It might be a tad bit harsh to say mediocre this year. Might be a tad bit harsh. Tech was just teetering on good, man. Teetering on good. Needed that defense to be a little bit better, but teetering on good. And they're moving in the right direction. I would just give you that hope, like Joey is moving in the right direction. Slowly, this has not been like Coach Prime level rebuild where you can come in and just skip steps and do it really fast. But slowly but surely, it does feel like he is building something. So I think there will probably be good days ahead, gentle brutality. I know that is at Tech fans, you've been since 2009 that you had a 9-win season. So I definitely get how you're getting a bit tired of not quite reaching the apex of where you want to go. Harrison, Lincoln Cure update. Well, I don't have anything super inside to tell you. He went to Oregon for the visit this weekend with his parents. I think K-State has a lot of irons in the fire at tight end right now, if that tells you anything. Whether or not that will produce anything, whether or not that means that Lincoln Cure is going to wind up decommitting and going to Oregon, I don't know. The vibes have not felt great for a while, and I certainly would not be shocked in any way, shape, or form if you wound up as an Oregon Duck. Well, that's about the best that I can give you. David, what's up, David? Appreciate you. What up, Kurtz? Can't wait to fly out to Dallas for the title game. Hey, there you go. Big 12 may have wanted Colorado for the eyeballs, but I don't care. And you shouldn't care. You shouldn't care. If you're an Iowa State fan, hell no, you shouldn't care. No, of course not. Get there, go to the game, enjoy it. I had such a good time being there in 2022, 2 years ago, to watch K-State beat TCU. If you get a game like that, boy, that was a stressful one. Go Cyclones. All right, David, thank you for your message. Thank you for your support. And great to hear from you. It's been a minute. Tom, what's up, Tom? Tom, should we have a standard consequence when a visiting team plants a flag on the home team's field after a game? If so, what consequence? Yeah, we saw a lot of that this weekend. We had obviously Ohio State, Michigan, North Carolina, NC State. There were like 2 or 3 others. Blanking on some of those right now. But point being, Texas A&M, although Sark did a really good job of putting that fire out. I think you're going to have to put a consequence on it just because of how crazy it got here. It's sort of like when everybody saw Texas throw things on the field at Georgia and get a call change. Now everybody wants to throw stuff on the field because of what the reaction has been. You probably have to change it. But I don't think you should, in an ideal world, have to do that. I am kind of the mind like, hey, win the game. You don't win the game, you're going to have to deal with some celebrating going on your field, and that sucks, but it's the reality, and unfortunately, it does not seem to be working out that can happen with any sort of peace to follow. So based on what has happened in the aftermath, I do think you should try to figure out some sort of consequence. I guess the other thing I would say is, like, if we're going to have consequences for fans just storming the field, these schools are going to get fined. The Big 12 just did it to Arizona State. Why should you not have consequences for doing this when it's going to just incite a riot every single time? So that's where I'm at on that, Tom. I try really hard not to be a stick in the mud, and I definitely don't want to be, like some wet blanket on that stuff. And I'm generally not at all. I'm typically the opposite, but there was just too much of that going on Saturday. You're probably going to have to nip it in the bud. Let's talk about the SEC, shall we? Okay. The SEC narrative battle has gotten really out of control. And the perfect encapsulation of any argument these days basically is what this SEC thing has turned into. And I'm talking any argument, whether it's sports, politics, anything in life. You have no middle ground. Like, nobody is willing, seemingly, to cede any kind of middle ground. And you have people just playing straight down party lines. And that's what we have here with the SEC discourse. One of the worst offenders defending the SEC, by the way, actually comes from Big 12 country. And I will tell you about that more in just a moment. But I got caught in the crossfire of this throughout the entire football weekend, which started in earnest on Friday with Georgia Tech, and everybody watching that crazy game. And it just is like the takes, man. I know I will get branded as somebody who's, Big 12 homer, this anti-SEC crusade. I feel like I'm actually pretty well reasoned and reasonable on this. I'm not saying that the SEC is a bad conference. I'm not saying that the Big 12, the Big 12 could send Arizona State into the SEC and they would win the league. But the pushback, the opposite side has been so grossly over-exaggerated, pretending that this SEC is the 2019 version of the SEC, that you kind of have to get a little hyperbolic and feisty to fight it, or else it'll just sit there unchecked and just be a ridiculous notion of where the SEC is in the year of our Lord, 2024, my friends. So my take on the SEC, if you want it here, anybody living in the Twitter mentions, which, by the way, SEC fans, Twitter mentions, a lot of spelling errors. Here's my basic take on the SEC. I do think they are the best conference in the country. Not only do I think that, but Sagarin would agree in Sagarin's conference rankings. Like, I do think the SEC is the best conference in the country. I don't think they have anybody as high level as Oregon. Maybe a Penn State or Ohio State. We'll see. But I think Oregon would be the best team in either conference. But I think the depth of really good teams is better in the SEC. You could look at like a South Carolina for a good example of that. So I do think they're the best league in the country. But they are not miles ahead of everybody else like they used to be. And that is the problem. SEC fans, media, everybody who surrounds that ecosystem seems to be still locked into this idea that the SEC is the same this year as it has been for the previous 15 years, and that there is benefit of the doubt that should be extended at all times because of that run the SEC has been on. And that is simply something that we should not stand for in college football. This isn't the 2022 SEC. This is not 2009 to 2021 SEC. That is not a wild take based on the evidence that we have out there from this year, right? It's not a wild take at all to say that about the SEC. We just saw Georgia go to 8 overtimes with Georgia Tech after falling behind 17-0 and needing really a miracle comeback aided by the lack of a targeting call on the crucial turnover that happened there. And I'm not blaming the whole game on that because I really don't care. Once it got into overtime and especially into, the 2-point shootout and we're in the 8th overtime, like the point had been made long before that. That's the other thing I hated about SEC fans in my mentions all coming back the next day. Oh, well, this aged well. Well, yeah, it did because the point absolutely stands. Whether Georgia won in a 2-point shootout in 8 overtimes or had lost the game in regulation, the point stands on its own very firmly. That was the 5th best team in the ACC, and they essentially played Georgia to a stalemate in their home stadium. Georgia is not head and shoulders above everybody else this year. That is just not the case. Alabama, they lost to 2 6-6 teams, Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. The Oklahoma game was not even really close. I mean, they got pretty much drilled by Oklahoma. Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin, who I enjoy. The talk is good for college football. Much as I disagree with his comments about the Big 12 and ACC, I like that he gives us interesting content and discourse and is a fun personality. But my brother in Christ, you just lost to 7-5 Florida, a team that wanted its head coach fired the entire year. You lost earlier this year to 4-8 Kentucky. You cannot then turn around and say, well, we would just go tear up the Big 12. How many Florida and Kentucky level teams are in the Big 12? Like, that is the entire league. And you probably have 1 to 3 teams that are significantly better. And you just lost to a 4-8, 7-5. Like, you lost 2 of those games. If we put you through a Big 12 schedule, you would have lost at least 2 games. We saw it happen this year. That's what would have happened, Lane. You can't do that, man. I knew that this was really a take that, like, I should feel very entrenched in when I saw of all people, Ari Wasserman from On3 defending this and writing a really well done column about the SEC and its place this year and how different it is from years past. Ari Wasserman is somebody who I used to get I think he's good at his job, but I used to get very annoyed with him because he's a guy that like lives by the recruiting rankings, like talent composite, no room for budging on that. Stars matter, as all in on that as you possibly could be. And he's the guy saying, look, we got to take a step back this year, man. The SEC is not what the SEC has been. And a lot of it is, it's not just the evidence that we have. It's because like we can point to circumstances here that have changed this. Like before the portal, when it was very easy, it became very easy to transfer, and there are NIL deals that can be done for your second stringers at like a Big 12 school, for instance, where you can make more money. Like that allowed the playing field to be leveled and these teams to not just stockpile like a 3 deep that would be better than anywhere else in Power 4 football just about. You can't hang on to as much talent like that. So, of course, the gap is going to close a bit. And what do you know? The last 2 years, the SEC has been down a bit. Like last year, Alabama, Florida State fans, I'll ride with you, should have been left out of the playoff. That should have been an SEC-less playoff last year. But instead, Alabama snuck its way in. So 2 years in a row, you've kind of had a more subdued SEC. And then what happened over the offseason? Nick Saban retired. And Nick Saban had just a wild influence on the SEC media narrative and just everything that happened over the last 15 years. But with him gone and not having that as just like an auto playoff caliber team there, that's going to change things. So this is not a Big 12 homer take to say that the SEC is not what it has been. Maybe it will get back there. Maybe it won't. Maybe we'll look back in 5 years and say, hey, it took some time for this to really sink in for everybody, but that was accurate. We'll see. It remains to be determined. But for now, this year, it's not that league. And that's why it has annoyed me so much. This is not to say anything about the guy personally. I think he does a good job. He's got a great gig at On3, but J.D. Pickell, who is a former Baylor Bear, right, which is a part of this that's frustrating. He said back on November 26th, if I'm the SEC and I'm seeing who's getting a playoff spot over some of our 3-loss teams that would ragdoll them, I may just go start my own playoff path with my own playoff with the Big Ten. Who is Alabama? Alabama would ragdoll Indiana. This isn't even directed necessarily at the Big 12. Alabama would ragdoll SMU? The hell they would. Alabama got ragdolled by Oklahoma. I just saw it 2 weeks ago. It's an asinine take where you're just living in the past. You're living it. That is a take that you should have scheduled for 2020, but instead you popped it out in 2024. It's not good. To me, that's just lazy relying on the past and not paying attention to what's in front of your eyes this year. And then he follows it up after getting a bunch of crap and says if Georgia had lost tonight, the SEC should still feel this way. So doubled down on it. And then the one that really got me, there's one more here. And that is him trying to defend himself. Here's what I did not say. I want to see the SEC and Big Ten start their own playoff. What I'm saying, if I'm acting in my best interest as the SEC and I see a 2-loss Big 12 and G5 team getting in over a better 3-loss team, I'm taking action as a conference holding cards. Well, okay, that 2 things. One, yes, anybody would do that with the leverage and power, virtually anybody, right? And that's what's going to happen. So there's nothing earth-shattering about that. That's fine. The problem is you threw in that little line about the 3-loss team that would ragdoll these other teams, which that's where you're carrying water for the SEC and just doing bidding for this narrative that used to exist that shouldn't exist in the same way in 2024 because we've got to treat every season on its own like what it is. We can't just be relying on the past 15 to 20 years every single season that the SEC trots out there. It's a different year. So, yeah, to me, this is just lazy and relying on the narrative that's been built up for the last 20 years. And, frustrating, but whatever. Reasonable minds can disagree. That was Exhibit A, like perfect example, because it's not just all the Florida Gator burners that I was dealing with in my mentions that will tell you stuff like that. You do every once in a while run into someone who will still say that, even if the Ari Wassermans of the world are wising up to it and looking at it and saying, no, like, hey, this actually isn't it, guys. This isn't it. I've got one final take here to divulge, and it sort of surrounds this because, there was, as I just pointed out, national college football media member not giving any respect to Big 12, ACC, Indiana, anybody not one of the top brands or just the SEC as a whole. You're going to need somebody to stand up for you. And that guy is Brett Yormark. Brett Yormark continues to stand up and stand tall for the Big 12. If the league doesn't get a top 4 spot in the playoff, if it is Boise State that winds up with that bye, it's not going to be for a lack of trying from Brett Yormark. He's pulling all the strings he has, and he actually took a page out of Nick Saban's book with the way that he is fighting right now for the league. So the fight for a minute, if you will recall, was not just about, hey, can we get a first round bye? It actually had devolved for the conference into, all right, can we even get into this thing at all when you were worried about Tulane or the week before Army? Now, that turned out to be silly, thankfully, because Army got just decleated by Notre Dame, and then Tulane got handled pretty well at home by Memphis. So they kind of laid an egg. Don't have to worry about that anymore. The Big 12 champion is going to be in this thing. Plus, you had the Big 12 winning out, like all 4 favorites, 1 out. So you're good. You're clear. And Yormark looks smart for not even addressing that part of it, because when that was going on a couple of weeks ago and Yormark kind of started this push, you were hearing him attack and talk about Boise. You were not hearing him talk about what was going on with the other G5s and can we even get in. He didn't address that. That was beneath him, too far below. Just smart. Because now, if you would have done that, it's just like giving that credence. You don't need to give that credence. And I say that understanding like I was somebody arguing and fighting for it because, I felt like it was the duty at that point to point it out and point out how ridiculous it would be. But Brett Yormark doing it officially as the conference, nah, you don't need to do that. But Boise is a real legitimate problem. Not getting that bye is a real legitimate problem that Brett Yormark has felt like addressing, and he has done it. Boise is 5 spots above anybody in the Big 12 in the last college football playoff rankings. We'll see if Arizona State, having a more impressive win over a similar opponent, can close any ground on them this week. I doubt that it's going to be much, if anything, at all. And I don't think that anything happening in the Big 12 championship, blowing out Iowa State, I don't know if any of that would be enough to actually bridge that gap with Boise if Boise were to win. Maybe you can dream up a scenario for me where it's like a very tight Boise win, last second Boise win, and you get Iowa State to lose by 4 touchdowns to Arizona State or something. I think highly unlikely. Or, you can flip that on its head. The reason I use Arizona State there is because they're higher in the playoff rankings right now than Iowa State. So they would be conceivably closer. But you have a hard time jumping them. But Brett Yormark is not giving up. Yormark is not giving up. He went on the Iowa State K-State broadcast, Farmageddon broadcast on Saturday, and talked to the broadcast crew, which I love that move. Middle of the game, he comes out and states his case. Says the committee needs to spend more time thinking about strength of schedule. I'm really focused on that. He says 82% of our opponents are Power 4, and we've won 71% of those games. That leads all FBS. There's a lot of parity, but you think about the Power 4 across all the major conferences, there's a lot of parity there as well. If you think about Texas coming from the Big 12 and leading the SEC. If you think about Oregon, they didn't even win the Pac-12 last year, and they're leading the Big 10. Not only is there parity across our conference, I think there is across the Power 4. But to me, it comes down to strength of schedule, and I think we need the committee to focus on that a little bit more. So, Joey McGuire also made this same point that Brett Yormark did up there. Joey McGuire took his time at the podium to say, basically, look what's happening in the ACC. SMU going from the American to the ACC looks like they may well win this thing. They will be playing for the conference championship. Texas, they're playing for the SEC conference championship after coming from the Big 12. Oregon, they're playing for the Big 10 championship after coming from the Pac-12. And Arizona State, they're playing for a Big 12 championship after coming from the Pac-12, which reinforces the idea that there's a lot of parity everywhere. And there's not just dominant conferences that should be like running away with everything. Reinforces the idea that there's parity out there. We should not be giving conferences like the SEC some kind of crazy preferential treatment, and that you need to just evaluate things based on strength of schedule, because that's one of the easier ways to do it when you have so much variance in what's happening and teams on the move and leading other conferences. But the bigger point to me here is just that Brett Yormark's pulling all the strings that he can for this. One, just a general idea, and this has been a theme with me for Yormark the entire time. I just love how the guy fights. Guy fights for the league. He's not going to give up, and he's not going to go quietly into the night, and he's still doing it. But also, this is a very Nick Saban-like move. I love a guy who can pull like a Nick Saban card here, because remember 2 years ago, 2022, Saban is upset that he doesn't get into the playoff. That Bama team got left out of the playoff, had to go play K-State in the Sugar Bowl. And, you know, he still, by the way, complains about it. And TCU, even though TCU beat Michigan, he still complains about it. But Nick Saban got on TV that night during conference championship weekend on ESPN, and they were throwing him out there to just publicly state his case. He's just on the stump, like on ESPN. And they gave him that platform. They were happy to platform Nick Saban to do that. Well, Brett Yormark said, hey, Fox, get out of the way and let me go to work. And he got Fox to platform him to go make that case. Is that making any kind of legitimate impact? Probably not anything crazy, but it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. And I love that he's out there doing it. And Nick Saban certainly thought it was important enough to do 2 years ago. So maybe it has some level of effect. If you get enough people talking about it, it's not just Yormark's comments, but if he does that and then fans hear it, other broadcasters hear it, and it becomes more a part of the discourse, maybe then it does begin to have some influence. I'm just glad that Brett Yormark is on the Big 12 side. He also did this, if you want to talk about strings that he pulled with ESPN. Heartland College Sports, shout out to that crew. They had a great report that says Heartland College Sports has learned from sources that Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark called ESPN personally and, quote, put a lot of pressure on the network to fix the way they spoke about and showcased the Big 12 conference. This seemingly in the aftermath of what Desmond Howard did a couple of weeks ago. You saw my video on the channel about that. Desmond Howard looking at the Arizona game on the rundown, the Arizona State game, Arizona State K-State game, and saying, like, why are we picking this? Why was this even on the outline? Just talking down to the league and ushering it off as something completely not important. Well, since then, there's been a little bit of a shift, right? You had Nick Saban going on a nice little positive rant here about how much he loves Cam Skattebo. He said, that's got to be my favorite player in college football, man. The guy is rugged and tough. I just love a great competitor, and he's all that. Desmond Howard did issue like some form of an apology when we next saw him on air too. So clearly somebody got in Desmond Howard's ear, and apparently it was Brett Yormark who started all that by hopping on the phone and being like, hey, business partner who was going to broadcast the game later that night that your guy crapped all over, how about you don't do that? How about you shape up a little bit? Remember, man, 2021, July 2021, how wild the narratives were. Stuart Mandel was out here throwing heinous TV numbers out there that he would never fully backtrack and apologize on, even though he more or less admitted that he was wrong or misleading about. That was the type of stuff that was happening. People saying like, oh, man, if you look at the Hateful Eight TV numbers, they're actually like basically as bad or worse than the American. And there's no way. How will these teams ever get, he projected like a quarter of what they wound up getting for their TV deal. That was the stuff that was happening when nobody was out there trying to fight it. Now the Big 12 is. I can't remember if I've talked about this here or not, if this happened since the last live show, but you had the tweet that the Big 12 conference actually sent out there in response to the comments that at this point, I think it was in response to Saban, going after Saban, not the Kiffin comments, but the Saban comments. And they quote tweeted it when he had said, like, Ole Miss, throw Ole Miss in the Big 12. What would their record be? And the Big 12 quote tweets it and throws up the score bugs of 3 Ole Miss losses to Big 12 teams that have happened the last 3 times they've played them. So I love that you got a conference doing that, man. They're trying to control it. They're trying to control the narrative as much as possible. And to the extent that you can, you might as well do it. I love Brett Yormark for that. I love the entire attitude of the league for that. And I thought we saw more of that this weekend. How much will it pay dividends this year? It probably doesn't really matter because it's going to be either Boise loses and everything is great, or Boise doesn't, and Big 12 fans will be left here to unfortunately complain and try and continue to fight for their better spot at the college football table. It is what it is. See where it goes, but I like the man that's in charge. I'll tell you that much. All right, very long show tonight, like I said it would be. But thank you all for being here. Appreciate that immensely. Tons of people here on Twitter right now. Let me tell you, if you want this type of content in your inbox 3 days a week for totally free, free 95, join the 3,000 plus subscribers to the Big 12 newsletter, open for business, ofbnews.com to subscribe. That's ofbnews.com. Or just click the link in the description of the video. I made it easy for you there. ofbnews.com to get subscribed to Open for Business. If you like my content, you like what I'm doing here, that is a great, great way to support me right now. Also, if you just like the video, that is amazing. I would appreciate that. And let's see, John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo. If you didn't catch it live, you want to leave a question or comment there with a donation, I will get to it to kick off the next show. So you can always communicate with me that way. And I think that is it. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday night. Hope you have a wonderful week. Hope you guys all had a great Thanksgiving. First time I talked to you since then. Forgot about that. I am grateful for everybody who's here and takes in the content, even the haters who help me do this on a regular basis. So thank you for everybody. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy holidays. Hope you enjoy the holiday season, and I will talk to you very soon.